Hello dear students, I would like to welcome you all on the online platform of KRT Arts, BH Commerce and AM Science, that is KTHM College, Nashik. I hope that you all are safe and secure during this COVID-19 pandemic situation. I am Dr. Bharati Rajebhosale, working as an assistant professor in the Department of English. Today in this video lecture, I would like to deal with the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore. We know that Rabindranath Tagore is a very famous poet. So also, he received Nobel Prize for Literature for his famous work Gitanjali, which is a collection of poems. Now I would like to talk about the poet Rabindranath Tagore, who was born in 1861 and died in 1941. He was a Nobel laureate who contributed immensely in Indian literature as well as in Indian English literature. He was a poet, dramatist, short story writer, novelist, and an educationist. So we can say that he was having a versatile personality. So also he was a philosopher and a nation builder. Now I would like to focus on his works. Actually, this poet, we know that he belongs to Bengal, West Bengal, and he primarily wrote in Bengali, and afterwards he translated his works into English. So his early poetry dealt with nature and love, but later on his works have a philosophical and religious tone. Primarily he wrote in Bengali. We know that he belongs to Bengal, so it's very natural that he wrote in his mother tongue, that is in Bengali, and later on he translated many works in English. Gitanjali, The Gardener, The Crescent Moon are some we can say are very famous works by Rabindranath Tagore. He did this into English, and it was published with an introduction by very famous poet, that is W.B. Yeats, in 1912. Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature for his collection of poems, that is Gitanjali, in 1930. Now we will see the central theme of this famous poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear. We know, dear students, the title of the poem itself is very suggestive. It tells us that what kind of country the poet is expecting. The title itself suggests that where the mind is without fear. So the poet is expecting such a kind of country where the people are fearless. So actually this poem, it is taken from Gitanjali. We know that Gitanjali, it is a collection of poems. This poem is the 35th of the Gitanjali. The poem is in the form of a prayer. Rabindranath Tagore prays for his country, that is India, of pre-independence times. He prays to God to awaken his country from the darkness of slavery into bright ideal state of freedom. The poet expects freedom and emancipation from petty concerns and narrow prejudices. So this is the central theme of this poem, and it is very crystal clear that Rabindranath Tagore, we know that he belongs to pre-independence era, and we know at that time India was ruled by the British people, and how the people were suffering under the British rule. And so the Tagore is praying God, he is urging God, and he is expecting such a kind of country where people will be fearless and they will get rid of slavery. They will live happily in a bright, ideal state of freedom. So we can say, so also at the same time, the poet feels, the poet expects freedom. So freedom is, how much freedom is important, we know, dear students. So also at the same time, the poet expects emancipation from petty concerns and narrow prejudices. Petty concerns and narrow prejudices means we know that definitely the how we are having many prejudices, or how the class is divided into various sections, and how the people are having prejudices about each other. Now, I would like to recite this poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear, by Rabindranath Tagore. Listen carefully. Where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of a dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that haven of freedom, my father, let my country awake. So we know, dear students, this poem, it's a very short one, it's a prayer, we know, and how the poet is urging God, and he is calling him, he is addressing him as my father, and he is requesting him, or we can say he is praying God, and that what kind of country he is expecting, and in such a country let his country awake. Now we are going to study this poem in detail. We know that Tagore belonged to pre-independence era. Pre-independence era means before 1947. We know that how British ruled our country, that is India, and so that period is a pre-independence, means before independence, that is before 1947. So the poem is composed during the period of British colonialism. India was under the rule of British. We know all these things. So also we know history, that is we know about East India Company, how British came in India, how they established here, and how they become ruler here. We know all these things very well. And we know, dear students, that actually Tagore died in 1941, before India became free from the shackles of slavery, that is from British Raj. We got freedom in 1947, but Tagore witnessed that colonized India, where people were suppressed, they were oppressed by British. And what happened with Indian people? They were suppressed by British, we know. So they lost their dignity, they lost their confidence. So the poet is feeling very, very sad for his country, we know, and at that time he knew very well the importance of freedom. We know that how much freedom matters in our life, we know very well. So when our country, when it was under the British rule, how the people were suffered a lot, how they lost their dignity, how they lost their confidence, we know all these things. And so the poet is addressing God in this poem. He is urging God. He is addressing him as my father. The opening line of the poem. In it, the poet says, where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. So we can say the opening line, that is where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. The Tagore expects such a country, such a place where people will be fearless and they could live with dignity, they could live confidently. So we know how much freedom is important in our lives. The poet expects such a country where knowledge could be free for all people. It should be free for each individual. We know, dear students, that in pre-independence era in India, each and everybody was not able to take education. They were not able to take knowledge. They were not able to get knowledge. And the poet was quite aware of the fact that country is divided into many classes, caste, religions and languages and so on. So we know that in pre-independence India, each and everybody was not able to take education. Actually, we can say there was a monopoly of a certain class of taking education, we can say, and most of the people they were not able to take education, or they were unable to get knowledge. The knowledge was bound to certain classes of a society. Actually, what our poet wants, what Rabindranath Tagore expects, that it should not be limited to certain class of a society. So we can say that this is nothing but the domestic walls. It should not be limited to certain class of society. The poet wishes such a country where people are not divided into various classes. The poet expects that people, they should live together happily, they should unite and they should fight against Britisher for their freedom. The poet here expects the world which is not broken into fragments. So we can say the poet also wants that the world or the India, it should not be fragmented, or it should not be divided into many classes, into many religions, into many castes. And we know all these things very well. We know that how in India, how caste system is prominent, how in India we know that how caste system, class system, religion, so many things matter in life. And so actually the poet is aware of all these things, and he is not expecting such a kind of discrimination in the society, we know. And according to the Tagore, according to the poet, each and everybody should be able to get knowledge. And so the poet has said, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Where the head is held high means the people, they should be able to live confidently here. They should be able to live in the freedom, and so he is expecting freedom. So also the poet says, where knowledge is free, so each and everybody should be able to take knowledge. Then poet says, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. We know, dear students, how the society is divided into various classes, what kind of discrimination often we found in society, and we are quite aware of all these things. No matter that we are living in 21st century, but even though all these things are, we are also watching all these things happening in our society, that there is a discrimination on the basis of a caste, class, gender and religion, language and so many factors. So discrimination is definitely there in the society. But according to the poet, this discrimination or we can say caste, class, religion. All these are narrow domestic walls, and we should not confine ourselves within these walls. So he is expecting that country, that India or the country, what he is expecting, it is a very ideal one according to the Rabindranath Tagore, where the people, they should be fearless, they could live life confidently, they could live it, we can say, courageously, fearlessly, and in a very good manner. Okay, now, so there, the poet is not expecting discrimination on the basis of caste, class, and gender. Rational thinking is very, very necessary according to the poet. So he says, the poet says in the poem, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. So we know that according to the poet, how should be people in India? They should be very, very truthful. They should be very, very truthful, and rational thinking is very, very necessary. It is very, very important according to the poet. Again, the poet says, thought and action go hand in hand. So when the poet says, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. So we can say, whatever you want to achieve in your life, you have to work hard, we know. So according to the poet, tireless striving means constant struggle towards a goal is definitely needed. And if you want to be perfect, if you want to achieve something in your life, you have to struggle, you have to work hard with strength. The poet stresses the need of rational thinking. We know in the society how the society believe in superstitions, in outdated practices. But the poet, definitely he does not believe in such kinds of practices, and so he says them as outdated practices. And definitely all these outdated practices, superstitions, all these things, definitely they are not going to help people. So people should get rid of all these outdated practices. Clearer reasoning is needed for achieving the dream of bright India. So what kind of India the poet is expecting? We know that actually according to him, it's a kind of heaven. The people will live very, very happily. They will not under the burden of anyone. They will not be suppressed by anyone. So such kind of country the Tagore is expecting in his dream. So we can say it is his dream. Though he is a praying God, it is his dream that he is expecting ideal India in his dream. According to the poet, your actions and words go hand in hand together. Thought and action go hand in hand, and narrow thinking, definitely it will not lead India towards bright India. And according to the poet, definitely heaven means free India, where people could live freely. The people will be able to achieve their goal when they will be free from the British rule. Again the poet urges the God, or he is addressing him. We know what the poet is saying in the last line of the poem. Into that haven of freedom, my father, let my country up. So in the last line of the poem, it is very crystal clear that when the poet is addressing my father, or when he has used that typical word, that is my father, definitely my father here means God, that Almighty God. and he is addressing him, he is praying God, and he is expecting such a country, such a heaven of a freedom where the people will awake. So the poet says, into that heaven of a freedom, my father, let my country awake. So we know, in this way Tagore dreams such a India where definitely people will be scientific, progressive, and rational. They will not believe in superstitions and blind faiths. So such kinds of thinking, that is a rational thinking, is very very necessary for Indian people. Thought and action go hand in hand. So according to the poet, there should not be any difference in your words and in your action. Both should go together. So in this way, the poet, expecting an ideal state, an ideal country, and the poet says the country should be united, and he urges God that into that heaven of a freedom, let my country awake. So how much freedom is important to us, we know it very well, and how in pre-independent India, we know that how there were many movements, freedom movements. We know all the history, that how Gandhiji, how Lokmanya Tilak, and so many freedom fighters, how they fought for the freedom of India. Actually, we are quite aware of all these things, that actually Rabindranath Tagore, he died before we got the freedom. Actually, this poet, he died in 1941 and we got freedom in 1947. So now we can say, the poet, he had experienced that particular life under the British Raj, or we can say when the British were rulers. So how freedom is important for each and everybody, for each individual, is underlined or is important for us. The poet has given, or the poet has stressed this point very well in this poem. So we can say, this poem, it's a prayer. Actually it's a prayer, and the poet urging God that in such kind of heaven of a freedom, my father, let my country awake. So God, or we can say definitely he will help us, or he will make people aware of all these things, and the people, they, when they will be free from the shackles of British, or from the shackles of, we know, slavery, how will they become free, and how will they enjoy their life, how will they will be very very happy, we can say they will be very very satisfied when they were not oppressed, when they will not oppressed by anyone. Definitely they will able to go forward in their life, or they will be able to touch, or we can say they will be able to achieve their targets, their goals, their ambition in their life. So in this way, this poem is completed here. Hope you have enjoyed this poem and understood this poem. Thank you very much.